Dr. Ruser is here to provide an update on some research data about prescribing in Pennsylvania's workers' comp system. For those of you who are not familiar with the Workers' Comp Research Institute, they're a nonprofit organization that conducts a variety of research on workers' compensation issues across the country. So they bring to us a great grouping of data, and if you are ready to begin, then we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cox. So, thank you, Chairman Cox, Minority Chairman Harkins, and the members of the House Committee on Labor and Industry for inviting me to talk about our work. My name is John Ruser, and I am the President and CEO of the Workers' Comp Research Institute, or WCRI. We're a nonprofit public policy research organization located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We provide information to all stakeholders in the various state workers' compensation systems. That information is regularly used in public policy debates. Importantly, we do not take positions on policy, nor do we make policy recommendations. We provide just the facts so that stakeholders can make informed decisions about possible workers' compensation reforms. Today, I'm going to talk about prescriptions in the Pennsylvania workers' comp system. I'm going to focus on two aspects. One is the impact of House Bill 1846, which was designed to limit physician dispensing of drugs. The other is trends in prescriptions and the landscape of prescriptions as of the most recent time period for which we have data, which is the first quarter of 2018. Let me begin by discussing the regulation of physician dispensing generally and then focus on Pennsylvania. There are two broad approaches that states have implemented to control physician dispensing of drugs. These approaches are price-focused reforms and limiting reforms. Under price-focused reforms, physician dispensers may dispense drugs, but only at prices related to average wholesale price of the original National Drug Code, or NDC, of the drug. Limiting reforms limit the type of drugs that physicians can dispense or limit the dispensing to short time periods. A number of states, including California and Illinois, regulated physician dispensing by means of price reforms. A WCRI study entitled A Multi-State Perspective on Physician Dispensing found that after these reforms, physicians dispensed fewer prescriptions, but physician dispensing was still common. The study also found that the prices paid to physicians for common drugs decreased substantially after the reforms in most states. However, we observed increased physician dispensing of higher-priced new strengths and a new formulation in several states, driving up physician prices for several common drugs. In contrast to the reforms in other states, Pennsylvania's HB 1846, which was effective at the end of 2014, combined both price and limiting reforms. Under the bill, reimbursement cannot exceed 110% of the average wholesale price of the original manufacturer's National Drug Code used in the repackaging process. That is the price regulation component of the bill. In addition, the bill stipulated that there would be no reimbursement to a physician for dispensing over-the-counter strength drugs, while physician dispensing of DEA Schedule II drugs, such as Vicodin and Percocet, was limited to a short fill, and physician dispensing of all other prescription strength drugs was limited to a 30-day supply. These were the limiting reforms of the bill. At the request of the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation Advisory Council, last year, WCRI conducted a study of the impact of HB 1846. We compared prescription data for 2 years before the bill became effective, that is 2013 and 2014, to the 2 years afterwards, that is 2015 and 2016. We looked at prescriptions filled each year that were filled within the first 2 years after the injury. What we found was that fewer prescriptions were dispensed by physicians after the bill became effective, and the prices paid to physicians dropped after the reforms went into effect. So please refer to Figure 1, which is in the copy of my written testimony and also on the screen. So what we see is that 1 in 3 prescriptions were physician dispensed pre-reform, while only 1 in 10 prescriptions were physician dispensed after the reform. Further, physician dispensing accounted for around 50% of prescription drug costs before the reform, but only 4% afterwards. Finally, not in the slide, prices paid to physicians for common drugs decreased by 15 to 81% after the reforms. Looking beyond just physician dispensing, we found that fewer prescriptions overall were dispensed after the reform. and drug costs per worker decreased among Pennsylvania injured workers receiving medical care. However, the emergence of some new pharmacies moderated the price reductions from the physician dispensing reforms. These new pharmacies disproportionately dispensed expensive compound drugs, over-the-counter topical analgesics, and new strength drugs. Compound drugs are created by mixing individual ingredients together, generally forming into a topical cream. And focusing specifically on these, we saw that the share of prescription costs associated or accounted for by these drugs quadrupled around the time of the physician dispensing reforms. And you can see that in this slide here. So whereas in 2013, only 8% of all prescription payments were for compounding, that share increased to 43% in 2015 before dropping back to 31% in 2016. The growth in compounding was fueled by the new pharmacies that dispense compounds more frequently than existing pharmacies. But importantly, data that I will mention shortly indicate that compounding is no longer a significant share of prescription costs. Our report on physician dispensing stopped with 2016 data. It is important to know what has happened in Pennsylvania since that time. The data that I'm going to present to you now are unpublished and preliminary. I'm reporting on them to give you a sense of the most up-to-date picture that I can of prescription drugs in the Pennsylvania workers' comp system and to provide some comparisons with some other states. We measured prescription payment shares for groups of drugs, therapeutic groups of drugs, for prescriptions filled each quarter within the first 3 years post-injury. We measured the payment shares quarterly from the last quarter of 2014, so just before the passage of the physician dispensing bill, up to the first quarter of 2018, the last quarter for which we have current data. Over this time period, there was a change in which drug group had the highest share of prescription payments. While compounds had a high share of all prescription payments early in the time period, that share has dropped substantially in recent quarters. As of the first quarter of 2018, compounds accounted for 7% of all prescription payments. And the recent Pennsylvania experience with compounds is not unique. Compounding has dropped in all states where it has accounted for a significant share in past years. As compounds began to decline, the share of all payments accounted for dermatologicals began to increase. Dermatologicals include both prescription and over-the-counter strength products such as Lidoderm, Lidopro, Terracin, Pensed, among others. In the fourth quarter of 2015, when compounds were at their peak, dermatologicals accounted for 10% of all drug payments. That share increased over the next couple of years, and dermatologicals have continued to have the highest payment share of any drug group since 2017. In the most recent quarter for which we have data, dermatologicals were 1/3 of all prescription payments. These dermatologicals are often dispensed by the new pharmacies that previously engaged in dispensing compounding or compounds. Like its experience with compounding, Pennsylvania's experience with dermatologicals is not unique. Dermatologicals account for a growing share of drug payments in a number of states, most notably Delaware. And also note that our peer organization, the California Workers' Comp Institute, recently reported on the growth of dermatologicals in California. In our data, we see that dermatologicals accounted for more than 20% of prescription shares in 11 of 27 study states in the first quarter of 2018. Pennsylvania and many states have been taking steps to reduce the dispensing of opioids, both in workers' compensation and in the general health system. These steps are reflected in the declining shares of payments for opioids in all 27 states that we studied, including Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, opioids accounted for 16 to 17% of all prescription payments in the first half of 2015. That share has dropped to 10 to 11% in the first half of 2018. In sum, HB 1846 substantially reduced physician dispensing, but new pharmacies appeared coincident with the bill that first dispensed compounds and now dispense dermatologicals. In the most recent data available to us, dermatologicals account for the highest share of prescription payments, while the payment for compounds has dropped substantially. The payment shares for opioids has also dropped, reflecting measures to control opioid prescribing. Thank you to the committee for this opportunity to share our research findings. and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you. You packed quite a bit of information in a very short period of time. The question I have is kind of continuing from the prior discussion. I was curious to know if your research included or will begin to include, if it's not already in, the co-packing of the various items. Is that something you're looking into or you're seeing in other states as well?
So, yeah, Deputy Secretary, we had mentioned the co-packing. Again, our data are only through the first quarter of 2018. We looked into the data. We did see instances of co-packs, convenience packs, in Pennsylvania and as well in other states. They are relatively rare in the data that we have for all the states. However, when we see them, indeed, they are quite expensive.
Okay. Chairman Harkins?
That's why I've been keeping low on asking any questions. Thank you for your great testimony. I guess I just more or less wanted to add that I received a call late last year from an injured employee who went to the emergency room on a Friday evening and was prescribed, but the doctor was hesitant on prescribing anything real strong to him. He got caught in a situation where couldn't get back to the doctor the following week quickly, Monday or Tuesday. But the cost factor, I guess, is one issue, as well as overprescribing, the worry from the doc's end that the Attorney General is going to be on their backs. I just hope we're not going down a slippery slope with that. But what I hear from many of the people with the issues is that it seems as though they're more or less a number and there's a cost factor involved. So if you wanted to add anything on that or comment on that.
Well, I mentioned the cost numbers that we had seen. They're the easiest things to see in claims data, which is the data that we frequently work with. But there is much more than just the cost. There is, in fact, the patient experience and the outcome of the injured workers. And those are much harder to see in claims data that do tend to focus on the services that are delivered and the prices associated with those. I would like to think that costs, however, are correlated with worker outcomes. If you get an injured worker back to work sooner, presumably the costs of the claim are going to be lower.
I agree with that, and I appreciate that. I just, again, hope we don't lose sight of the injured worker for the sake of cost. That's it for the day.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Chairman Dush, or Representative Dush. I'm sitting in for Chairman Cox while he's out for a moment.
Thank you. John, I appreciate your testimony, and you brought some very interesting things that kind of correlate with what Deputy Secretary Wyant had brought up in terms of the whack-a-mole kind of thing here. Every time we target something that these people who should be taking care of either their attorney clients or physicians as clients, they're taking advantage of their position, and this should be something that would fall under RICO as far as I'm concerned. Are there any states out there that have any kind of enforcement bills that would prevent this kind of stuff where you go after one part of it and then they shift their target, these new formularies, are there any states that are doing anything that is effective?
Well, states vary in terms of whether or not they have a mandatory drug formulary or not, and they also vary, as it turns out, on whether or not they address some of these new phenomena like dermatologicals. And so let me give one example. One of the most significant dermatologicals in Pennsylvania is a diclofenac solution, which is Voltaren is the brand name. It's a nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And in Texas, the diclofenac is a no drug, so it's you have to get prior approval before you use it. However, in the California formulary, it's not a no drug. You don't have to get prior approval to use it. So even in different states, when you look at their drug formularies, where they have drug formularies, they can differ about this particular drug and others.
Is there any kind of a clearinghouse as to where the legislation is being effective? And specific types of legislation from one state to another?
So I guess the answer is I don't know of a study that has done a comparative study of the different drug formularies to ascertain which are more effective than others. The drug formulas tend to be fairly new, and so it takes some period of time to put together the data to analyze those impacts.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Chairman McKenzie. I appreciate that. Thank you for your testimony here today. And your stats, are they focusing in just really on workers' comp, or do you have other reports that you may be able to share with the committee for general medicine? As far as, because here in Pennsylvania, we have a problem, and I'm from Philadelphia, so my problem usually shines a little more than everyone else's because of the population. And we want to make sure that we can do everything possible across the board. Do you have anything to go with that? Because the reason I ask general medicine is kind of personal to me, because I have a 17-year-old who got hurt playing sports. And of course, you know, his answer, some of the answers that we've gotten from the specialists we went to was do this, do that, and this. And we're trying to seek that out. So not to, I mean, at 17-year-olds, he has a ruptured disc. It's not going to fix unless surgery. So we're trying to avoid surgery and everything else. But I mean, he's taking Motrin, like pretty heavy, because we won't let him take anything else. But it's a scary thought as a parent. So it's something that we're trying to keep a close eye on, because it's so easy for these kids to get, and we're losing a generation here. Although we're talking about hurt workers today, we're losing a generation to these opioids from sports injuries and stuff like that, just getting hurt at home. How about your numbers? Do you have numbers on both?
So the short answer is no. We focus solely on workers' compensation
Okay.
insurance. Our data are based on data feeds from the payers, from the third-party administrators, from pharmacy benefits managers and the like, all in workers' comp.
Because it's like, although we see a decline here, we might be seeing an upcline there because they might not be going through the workers' comp system. That's because I'm a construction worker. I'm in a construction background. And what we've seen was we actually hired someone to take care of this problem full time, to take care of all the union members there, so they have someone to go turn to, because after workers' comp, that's where they seem to be shifting into the heroin end and all, because they no longer have access to this stuff. So we're trying to look at it and combat it in a few different directions, because even though they're not shown on here, they're going to be shown on there. And that's why I was hoping maybe you could enlighten us a little bit on that.
The only thing I could observe is that many of the guidelines are outside of workers' comp too. So there's CDC guidelines, and many state guidelines are not just specific to workers' compensation. They're focused on opioids more generally, and we see their impact in workers' comp because that's our focus. But hopefully they're being seen outside of the workers' comp system as well.
Thank you again for taking the time and testimony today. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman McKenzie, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Nielsen. Next, we're going to go to Representative Kiefer.
Thank you, Representative McKenzie. And thank you for participating on the panel. One question, or it's a twofold question. First is, how many states do have formularies?
Drug formulas. You know, I'm going to have to pass on that question. I'll be happy to get you the answer. I just don't have it right at my fingertips. It's if I hazard a guess, it's going to be wrong. But
Okay.
It's certainly not the majority of states.
Okay, and have you done any study or have any statistics of what is the impact? What has the impact been in general terms on the patient doctor relationship? The impact of those formularies on that relationship?
No, I don't know anything
You
about
haven't done any studies on that.
No. As I said, a lot of the claims data focus on the delivery of services, on the prices of those services, so it's hard to see things like the patient-doctor relationship. We have other studies that we do where we do interview the injured workers, and we ask them about their experience in the work comp system, but it's more general set of questions about whether or not they're able to get the doctors they want to get, whether or not they get the services that the doctors think they should get. So we have a broad set of questions that we ask in our worker outcome surveys, but they're not specifically focused on opioids.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't I don't see any other members that have any other questions. Mr. Chairman?
My mic's bad.
All right, he broke his microphone, so we're not going to let him say anything else. Well, again, I do thank you for taking the time to come here and provide us with the information. Very valuable data. As I said, you packed a lot of information into a very short presentation. But again, thank you for traveling here and sharing the data with us, and we look forward to updates in the future.